it's not amazing numbers, right? A lot of the trials are fudged. I took all of that understanding and started looking at longevity as a whole and saying, well, statins aren't super effective. Blood pressure medicine, if you have high blood pressure,
All right, Dr. Zain, welcome to the call here. This is
yeah,
kind of an informal chat where we're just going to talk about a few topics that I find really interesting and I think you do as well.
yeah,
And then for everyone who's watching here, hopefully y'all can get some value via some different unique perspectives that Dr. Zain brings to the table here. So that being said, if you want to go ahead and just give a quick introduction to yourself and kind of how you started getting into the field of longevity.
yeah, totally. I think I always tell this story that when I was in medical school, I went to osteopathic medical school. The founder of osteopathy had this famous quote that they always told us, which was, "The role of the physician should be to find health. Any idiot can find disease." And that got me thinking, like, well, what is health? And all the stuff that I learned in medical school, I did two residencies, internal medicine and pediatrics. All the stuff that we learn in the hospital is problem solving. It's finding a disease and then treating it. So doing the thing that he was like, well, that's what idiots can do. And
Mm.
so trying to find health very quickly led me into the longevity optimization space. It's not a far jump, right? From one to the other. I think it goes further than that, and we can talk about that, what I'm doing in River Rock. But in the longevity optimization space, um, I took the skills that I had learned in residency in terms of problem solving, in terms of understanding statistics, Bayesian statistics, mortality, and evaluating carefully, much more carefully than most doctors do, whether a medication works or not. Earlier, you and I were talking about
Mhm.
statins and how if you actually look at the mortality data for primary prevention in all-cause mortality reduction, it's not amazing numbers, right? A lot of the trials are fudged by pharmaceutical industries. You know, the Jupiter trial is one of the ones that quoted a lot, but it was stopped early because they got a positive result and they didn't want to risk losing it, so they stopped it after 3 years instead of the planned five. I took all of that understanding and started looking at longevity as a whole and saying, well, statins aren't super effective. Blood pressure medicine, if you have high blood pressure, there's some benefit there for sure if you have the condition, but even that's not huge. So what are the huge benefits? Where are those? And I got into kind of, reading stuff from Peter Attia and looking into diet and exercise. Obviously, those are big questions. Um, and got excited about, hey, let's find the things that really move the needle a lot. Let's focus on the things that are the big drivers instead of, well, I'll manipulate your cholesterol at the top, right? And we'll get an extra 0.5% maybe if you squint at the data, right? Um, and then I found later, I've kind of found that same set of problems in the longevity space as people are now publishing all these studies and this and that. And it's the same set of statistical errors that were and are rampant in the pharmaceutical industry, right? It's everybody wants their thing to matter, but isn't willing or able to do the thing that proves that it matters. And so I've kind of come down to another quote I'm very fond of, actually, is Bruce Lee's quote. It says, "It's not daily increase, but daily decrease. Hack away at the unessential." And so that also has guided me quite a lot in my practice, where I'm like, what are the essential things for longevity? And I've come down to five, basically. So VO2 max, strength, social connectedness, don't smoke or minimize smoking, and blood pressure if your blood pressure is high, right? Um, Smoking is a weird one on that list, and technically I shouldn't include it because it's an avoid semantic, not a pursue semantic. And I mean, you should avoid stepping out into traffic. Is that a more, that's not really longevity medicine. Like, hey, I didn't step out into traffic today, right? Um, The reason I include it though is that it's something that everybody recognizes is a negative longevity factor. And this we perceive it to be very unhealthy, emotional feeling that smoking a pack of cigarettes a day is a very unhealthy thing. And we can quantify to some degree the impact on longevity. It's about 1.8, right? So two pack a day smoker versus non-smoker has a 1.8 times uh, mortality risk per on an annualized basis. Um, and then you compare that to something like social connectedness, and it's 1.5x. And you're like, whoa, that's bigger than I thought it would be, right? And then you compare it to something like blood pressure, and it's 1.15x. And you're like, oh, that's smaller than I thought it would be. And you compare it to cholesterol control, and it's like 1.001. Yeah, and you're like, wait a minute, I can't even detect that anymore, right? And then on the other side, you compare it to something like VO2 max, which is a 5x difference. And you're
Right.
like, whoa, 5x. Why is no one talking about VO2 max all the time? Right? Same for strength training. So if maintaining strength, it's like a 3x factor, right? So that's how I got to my five is by looking at the size of the effect. Um, and so, yeah, I think that's my core five. I got there by trying to find the biggest drivers. And then I have a very sort of like, look, all of this is on diminishing returns, right? So
Mhm.
going from the fifth percentile of VO2 max to the 97th percentile, you're going to huge benefit. Going from the 99th percentile to the 99.9th percentile, you're not even going to really, I mean, there's no real benefit on mortality, right? Um,
Yeah. And I think that, and we'll definitely dive into
yeah,
meetings.
we'll dive into all of it. I'm sorry,
Well,
I went on for a while
no,
there.
no, no, no. That was amazing because you actually answered like the next question that I had was
Okay.
how you chose, how you came to the
Yeah, yeah.
conclusion to choose those specific metrics. And it sounds like it was the magnitude of the effect that it's going to have on total longevity, basically. You
That
know?
is a surprisingly important factor, and I encourage everyone. Maybe we can even I'll send you a link.
Yeah.
One of my favorite reflection articles of all time. It was published on Slate Star Codex, and the author goes into the scientific literature around psychic phenomena and to say, okay, can you tell if someone is staring at you through a video screen remotely? They put a camera in the room, video screen somewhere else, and someone
Mhm.
either is or is not looking at that screen, right? Um, and there's a surprising amount of literature showing that people have precognition in different ways, right? And if you believe that now it's tiny effect, so they people do
Mhm.
only a tiny bit better than chance at
Mhm.
telling whether somebody is or is not in the room, but it's statistically significant if you get enough numbers, right?
Okay.
So it's not 50-50, it's 50.0001, but with large numbers and it's statistically significant by all the rules of the game of
Mhm.
science, right? So if you hold the standard of we're accepting small effects as real, if you can reach statistical significance, then you also believe in psychic phenomena, right?
Yeah.
The only thing that saves you is insisting on a large effect size.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then all of that falls away, but so do statins,
Mhm.
so do a ton of other, so does other uh, 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 longevity optimization, so on and so forth. You end up getting rid of a lot of things, and that was kind of the direction that I went because if you really look into how science works, you need a large effect size. Same for smoking. The reason we believe in smoking, it's not because we did a randomized control trial. We couldn't. Like you can't
Mhm.
randomly force
Yeah.
somebody to smoke a pack a day and somebody to smoke a placebo. How would that even work?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Um, but because the effect was so large, we were able to tell the difference. And so, I mean, how do you do a randomized control trial on, loneliness? Like, hey, I mean, you'd have to be a really Nazi kind of situation where like you round up 1,000
Yeah.
people at random and then isolate them and see how they do, right?
Mhm.
Um, so, I mean, to be fair, there are ways of experimentally working on that ethically, like You do it in the other direction. You randomly go find people who are isolated, right? And then
Yeah.
you sage interventions to de-isolate them,
Mm.
and see if there's an effect on mortality. So there are people are trying to do that work, but you can imagine that's tough work to do, right? And
Yeah.
long-term studies.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's spot on. I mean, so you've chosen the things that have the largest magnitude effect on longevity and said, "Hey, let's focus on these." And then kind of the way I'm interpreting it so far is like based on your other content is instead of going from the 90th percentile to like 99 in VO2 max, let's look at meaning and depth of life and meaning span, right? And so we'll definitely touch on that because I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but is that accurate? Kind of how I'm.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, we talk about length of life, and
Mhm.
once you've optimized that, I think one of the big challenges in the longevity space is to accept that you have maximized what you can get and there is no further optimization. And then all there is to work on is depth.
And yeah, exactly what you said there. And when I got to your channel and started getting deeper into your content, and you kind of put that out there, like you
Hmm.
just can't optimize further than this point, right? And at first, like my brain didn't want to accept it, like
Yeah.
there's got to be a way, that
Yeah.
it's.
Yeah.
But then as I started to reflect further and say, yeah, no, I mean, he's right. There's other ways to look at maximizing life. It's just obviously we intuitively know it's not just quantity of life, it's the quality of life, but the depth component, I think, the depth of the meaning of the life is, I think, what you bring to the table, which is so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's my favorite subject. I find most people in the longevity space need a little bit of a warm up to get to, as you said, right? Because it challenges the people in that sphere in their core focus, and you're sort of saying, "Hey, yeah, that's part of the focus, but you've let go of maybe even a more important side of the focus." And I think that does take people a minute to reorient. Um, and I am very much in the big picture, I'm an immortality skeptic, let's say, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, and that's actually my next couple of videos that I'm working on. Um, I think people underestimate the degree to which death is a feature, not a bug, right?
Hmm. Right.
Like even I mean, a death is evolution's main tool. We evolved to die. It's you're fighting 4 billion years of evolution, and it's not going to be a little gene here and a little gene there. It's
Yeah.
the core point of evolution, right? Is you need to get out of the way so the next generation can be more adapted to the
Hmm.
environment. Otherwise, evolution stops and the whole thing falls apart. Even on there's a famous saying in science, right? Is that physics advances one tombstone at a time, right?
Hmm.
When Einstein came out with his theory, it was not immediately adopted. It wasn't like all the physicists were like, "Oh, a great new theory, we adopt it." No, they fought him on it, and
Hmm.
it became adopted by the younger generation of physicists, and then became the normal physics when the older generation died. So even on a mimetic basis, people are not that adaptable, and probably shouldn't be in some ways, because otherwise we would jump on every new idea and not fight it hard enough. You need people who are going to fight new ideas to the death so that only the true ones survive. There's a death semantic there, right? And um, once you accept that, hey, okay, we're not going to hit immortality, then even if you optimize longevity to 200 years, which I don't think we'll get to, but even if you could, you okay, now you have 200 years of the same problem. Is Why is life worth living? And I think that for a lot of people in the longevity space, they get so caught up in the game, and that the game of maximizing longevity becomes the only thing they're focusing on, and it serves almost as a distraction from the real question, which is your life meaningful? And if so, how could you maximize the meaning of
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I know in my own experience, the more you try to optimize, it seems like
it? Mm-hmm.
when you're looking at every factor of lifestyle, for example, for
Sure.
prevention, the more you try to optimize it, the less basically quality of life you
Yeah.
have, less
Yeah.
enjoyment or less sense of depth and connection with others. Because, if you're trying to optimize every aspect of your meal plan, then you're not going to enjoy, a meal with a friend
Absolutely.
or a loved one.
Absolutely.
So it is a really interesting contrast there. And I think the approach is, yeah, it's spot on. Optimize kind of the core basics to the extent that you're getting Pareto's principle, you're getting the most bang for your
Correct.
buck. And then looking at other areas that are more meaningful, to go deeper into. And so I
Yeah.
was curious about, not to interrupt, but yeah, if you could speak a little bit to like, okay, someone comes into River Rock Medical, you're working with them as a patient. How do you integrate that, the meaning span piece? How do you start to have that conversation, and how do you find that people are receiving that? Like, are they receptive to that? What's been the experience so far?
Yeah, so that conversation is so far outside of what people are expecting from a physician that I have realized that it has to be forced upon them. Um, and when I do, some people jump on it and other people don't. Um, and I I think that the people that don't, I have enough patients now that have stuck with me for long enough that eventually it sinks in, and it can take years sometimes. I have one patient in mind who it took like 3 years, and then ultimately it sank in, oh, all the problems I'm having are because I'm not having this conversation, right? And we keep circling back around to, oh, that's the problem, right? Um, Other patients don't stay with me long enough. They come in for the year, we optimize longevity, we optimize, or we problem solve or we do whatever, and then they leave and then I don't get a chance to dive deeper into the meaning of purpose. How do I do it? I've started having a data gathering session as my first or second visit with the patient. And so I say, look, let's set aside the day together, 6, 8 hours, and we're going to do all of it. We'll do blood work. We're going to do an EKG. I do an echocardiogram in my office. We're going to do a VO2 max. We're going to get a strength assessment. We're going to, talk about all your problems, get a full list of accounting, meds,
Mhm.
um, do a social connectedness screen, blood pressure, obviously. And then we're going to sit down and talk about meaning and purpose. And I've developed certain algorithmic ways of starting that conversation, right? And so I start with questions like, so what things in life, if you could achieve them, would make your life worth living, even if there was quite a lot of suffering in the process, right? What things are you willing to suffer for? That's an important question. Another way of asking a question is, if you had all the money, if you had $1 billion, what after you bought the jet and the house and the whatever, what would you do with it? What work would you do? It's those kinds of questions that start to open up the doors to these questions. Ultimately, after I get some open-ended feedback, I have a list of a few categories that I've had these conversations enough. I've spotted patterns. We're all human, right? And so the things we find meaningful tend to fall into certain categories. And so for people that are really struggling, I'll just offer them the categories, right? And say, okay, multiple choice version of the question. Um,
Right.
and the categories I can go through real quick are social connections in terms of community,
Okay.
family, and intimacy. And those are three different sources of meaning. It's really interesting how that works is you can have the best intimate relationships in the world, but if you're driven by community and you don't have one, you won't feel fulfilled. You won't feel that your life is as meaningful as it should be. And vice versa, right? Um, Making your mark on the world is another source of meaning, right? That sense of, hey, I've really contributed. Um, Building, discovering, making, and exploring. There's a tinkering aspect that some people really, and a lot of people in the longevity space fall into that category. Is what they find meaningful is tinkering around and exploring something, right?
Right.
Exploring longevity. And so they do find it meaningful, not because of the longevity, but because they're exploring. And
Right.
and that's an interesting aspect. And I think people unconsciously realize they're being fulfilled by that, but they don't realize why. right?
Yeah.
People who have an artistic bent find self-expression. I call it expressing your soul. If you take a musician and he can't play music, his soul just withers and dies, right? Or an art, or a painter, or whatever. Um, I Collecting beautiful experiences. There are people who just love the idea of, hey, I saw that thing, I did that thing, I traveled there, I had that meal, right? That can be very motivating for a lot of people. Um, I mentioned family. I mean, that includes kids, right? That version of legacy in some
Yeah.
sense, through legacy through impact is making your mark on the world. Legacy through children is another version of that idea. Um, so those, I think I'm missing a couple, but those are an idea of the types of things that form categories of
Okay.
meaning. So great questions. Yeah, great questions. So how did I find the things? Is I started with the open-ended questions and tried to notice patterns, right? And I think it is whether seeking status should be its own bucket.